Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I used to think coffee could cure anything. Bad sleep? Double espresso? Client meltdown? Pour-over impatience? Marriage trouble? Well, back then, I thought time, love, and a latte would fix it. My name is Patel. I was 31 when I learned that coffee can't fix everything, but business might. I own a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, a narrow place wedged between a boutique cycling studio and a law firm that billed in 6-minute increments. On windy mornings, we'd prop the door open and pull in the loop crowd with the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon. I could tell you what people needed by how they dragged their briefcases: cappuccino with extra foam for the litigators, Americano for the designers who like to look haunted, almond milk latte for the CFOs who pretended not to like sugar. I loved it. I also loved my wife, Harper, who started out on a metal stool near the pastry case, hair up in a pencil bun, watercoloring brand concepts on the backs of our receipt paper. She talked in verbs. Scale, optimize, disrupt, she'd say, waving a biscotti like a conductor's baton. I'd correct her, "You mean sell," and she'd grin like I'd just given her a dare. When I met her, she was an assistant at a PR firm, which is a polite word for professional apologizer. She had a talent for sliding into someone's disaster and explaining why it was actually content. I had a coffee shop with a stubborn monthly break-even line, a good landlord, and a decent roaster in Pilsen who gave me prices like we were cousins. Harper wanted more. I don't begrudge that. Ambition is a beautiful thing when it's not pointed at your throat. "Let's build something," she said one night after close, sitting on the counter and swinging her legs like a teenager. It was January, the windows were fogged, and the bell over the door chimed from the heat kicking back on. "What if I launched my own agency? You'd be my first client. We'd do your social right. We'd pitch to local brands. I have a list." "I have a machine," I said, patting the La Marzocco like it could purr. "You make it sound easy." "It is," she said. "Until it's hard. Then we make it look easy." So I helped her. I drew up incorporation papers. I sat at our kitchen table and moved money from the emergency savings into a business account with a name she dreamed up at 2 a.m. Harper Company. Because apostrophes and ampersands look like promises. I designed her first invoices. I swapped my wholesale pastry supplier to a friend because Harper said artisan would photograph better. I introduced her to regulars with corner offices. I watched her take the city like a series of meetings. For 6 months, we were that couple, the coffee guy married to the marketing girl, both convinced we were building something grand. She conducted Zooms in our bedroom. I started closing at 9 just to get a quiet hour to scrub the drains and dump my thoughts into a notebook. We didn't have kids yet, which meant every hour we weren't sleeping could be turned into something billable. Love, when it's busy, feels like progress. And then she started saying it. Client meeting, as if it were a spell. She'd pull on a blazer and kiss me on the cheek while I was training a new hire, and her phone would be a blur of red and green bubbles, and she'd be gone. She'd come home late and leave earlier. She'd eat standing at the counter and talk in numbers like there was a scoreboard over our bed. I didn't argue. I made coffee. One night, the light over the sink went out, and instead of just replacing the bulb, I stared at the dead socket like it was a metaphor. I wondered if metaphors pay rent. "Tomorrow," she said with a yawn, "is a monster. I have 2 pitches in the morning and a client lunch. Then a board dinner. It's in River North. Please wear the suit that makes you look like you send people to jail." "Which one is that?" I asked. She didn't laugh. "The Navy. The one that says I take myself seriously." "I pour hot beverages," I said. "My suit says please hand me your card. I will laminate it and put it in a jar labeled Famous Friends." She smiled at her phone. The light over the sink stayed dark. The dinner was one of those events where everyone looked like a LinkedIn headshot come to life. There were vertical gardens on the walls, filament bulbs, and a signature cocktail named after a concept. Harper's agency had joined some coalition of growth brands. Their investors had money that looked old and clean, like it had never touched a wallet, only spreadsheets. I spent the first 20 minutes answering the question, "So, what do you do?" which is Midwestern for "How useful are you to me?" I answered honestly, "I run a coffee shop, we do direct trade, and we're experimenting with a nitro cold brew that tastes like a high five." Some smiled. One man asked if we had oat milk. Another said his daughter was obsessed with coffee, in the way teenagers are obsessed with any identity that fits in a photo. The speeches began. Harper took the mic. She was electric up there. She wore a white pantsuit that turned her into a line of light. She talked about story and velocity, about the way brands live and die by attention. She used terms like CAC and CPM as if they were cousins we should all feel bad for. She thanked her clients. She thanked her team. She glanced at me and smiled like a senator introducing her spouse. "And, of course," she said, voice warm, "my husband, Aaron, who makes the best coffee in Chicago." There was applause. I lifted my glass. She tilted her head and kept going, her smile getting sharper. "He keeps the caffeine flowing while I build an empire. Without him, well," she raised her eyebrows. "Without him, we'd all be a little sleepy." Laughter. The kind that stings. The words landed like a pebble in a pond, the ripples kept going, bumping into the edges of my life. I told myself she was kidding. I told myself she was proud of me. I told myself the burn was just the bourbon. But something slid sideways that night. I could feel it, the way you feel a draft in an old apartment. On the Uber home, she was still scrolling. "Don't pout," she said without looking up. "I'm not pouting." You get sensitive when people recognize greatness. I get sensitive when my wife uses me as a punchline. She put her phone down, finally. "Look, Aaron. You make coffee. I make companies. It's not an insult. It's a division of labor. Nobody wants me behind a machine, and nobody wants you in a boardroom." "I want me in a boardroom," I said, and surprised myself. She smiled like I was cute. We all want things. 2 weeks later, she stood in our kitchen with a stack of papers that had more staples than a middle school play. "I think we should take a break," she said. "This is getting constricting. It's distracting me. And it's jeopardizing the business." "Which business?" I asked. "Mine or yours?" "Ours," she said, and then immediately corrected herself. "Mine. Mine is where the upside is. Yours," she waved a hand, "is stable. Coffee is forever. People always need coffee." "What are those?" I asked, nodding at the papers. "Preliminary filings," she said. "I talked to a lawyer." "You already talked to a lawyer?" "Don't be dramatic. It's just options. If we separate, I want it clean. And I want what's mine. The coffee shop paperwork is in my name. Remember?" I remembered signing whatever she said to sign in the first flush of us. I remembered thinking, it's all ours, because we were in the stage where ours felt like a force field. "So you're threatening to take my shop," I said. "I'm explaining the reality," she said. "If you fight me, I'll take it. If you cooperate, maybe we can talk about a sale. A generous sale." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is dignity, sometimes it's just empty. She left for another client meeting. I walked to the shop and wiped down the countertops and tried to unfog a future that had just been fogged on purpose. The bell kept ringing, the line kept forming, bodies kept planting their elbows at the bar like we were a charger. The world didn't pause. It never does. That night, I didn't go home. I told myself it was because inventory was easier at midnight. I took the keys, rolled out the mat, and lay down near the espresso machine. The floor vibrated with the trains below. The mop bucket smelled like lemons and defeat. I woke up at 5 a.m. with a neck like a straw wrapper and an idea buzzing so hard it felt like a fever. It was something I'd said in the Uber, a line thrown off in the middle of trying not to cry. "I'm not just a barista. I'm an entrepreneur." It sounded like a punchline that had been waiting for a setup. Okay, fine, I thought. Let's see. If I'm an entrepreneur, then what problem am I solving? The problem was obvious. I was about to lose everything because I'd trusted the wrong person with the paperwork and the story. The other problem was that Harper had become her own kind of brand, fast, sleek, untouchable, off the back of something that, in Chicago, Still counted, reputation. And reputations, unlike espresso, burn slowly. People say all's fair in love and war. They forget to add business to that list. I called someone I hadn't spoken to since college, a guy named Iggy who could make a hard drive confess in a Wi-Fi network dance. Back then, he'd worn hoodies and typed like the keyboard had wronged him. Now he ran a boutique IT security firm for companies whose secrets couldn't afford daylight. Patel. He said when he picked up. Long time. You still making that coffee that tasted like, what did I say, like a well-behaved thunderstorm? You said it tasted like an apology that came on time, I said. Right, he laughed. How's the dream? Threaten, I said. Or, no, that's dramatic. It's precarious. Can I buy you a cup? He came by at 2, when the suits thinned and the students drifted in like they'd been scheduled by a cloud. He looked exactly the same, just more expensive. He ordered a macchiato and pulled a stool with the entitlement of the caffeinated. We did the light catch-up. Then I told him everything. I said the parts that made me sound weak. I said the parts that made me look foolish. I didn't say the parts that made me angry, because anger is a bad business partner. Tell me what you need, he said when I was done. I need to know what's really happening with her agency, I said. Not the press releases. The guts. The kind of things investors care about when they stop smiling. I do ethics, he said, not as a brag, but as a boundary. The legal kind. I'm not asking you to break anything, I said. I'm asking you to read what's already there. The trick with people who move fast is they forget the cleanup. They leave a trail. She's been creative. She keeps saying clients are protecting her. I don't think anyone's protecting anyone. I think their money's protecting itself. If there's anything, fraud, siphoning, invoice games, I need to put it in front of the right eyes. He took a slow sip, considering. You want me to follow the invoices? The vendors? The client accounts? I want you, I said, to read the receipts. He smiled. You always were good with lines. He didn't promise. He never used that word. He just tapped the rim of his cup and said, if I find something that looks like a crime, you take it to people who care about crimes. Not to the internet. Not to your friends. Investors, I said. The ones who bought the speeches and the light bulbs. Right, he said. And Aaron? If there's nothing, you walk. You build again. You let it go. I agreed. I didn't tell him that letting go was not my best skill. The next week was an odd combination of normal and war. I worked my shifts. I trained a kid named Alex who had a steady hand and dreams of writing screenplays that didn't sound like screenplays. I watched The Door at 6 p.m. and pretended not to. I went home to a kitchen that looked like a showroom and a bed that smelled like hotel soap. I slept better on the shop floor. I woke with a notebook full of bullet points about wholesale and pastry ratios and how to scale what I'd always kept small out of fear. Harper did not contact me except through texts the length of a novel. Let's be adults, one of them said. Just sign, Aaron. It's cleaner. Another, my lawyer says you're stalling. Another, you can't win this. The thing about certainty is that it looks beautiful until someone touches it. Iggy came in on a Wednesday, in a gray sweater that made him look like a benevolent algorithm. He didn't sit. He nodded toward the back. We walked into the storage room where we kept the filters and the sugar packets and conversations that needed walls. I'm going to give you facts, he said. No adjectives. Okay, I said. Harper's agency is not broke. It is, however, built like a Jenga tower. Pull the right piece, it collapses. She set up a network of shell vendors. The invoices are duplicates with clever misspellings. The payment terms are fast, 3 days, 7, not 30. The money goes out of the client accounts and ends up in an entity she controls. There are also a few breaches, NDA level. She recycled confidential pitch decks with a new logo and resold them to competitors. And then, he paused, there's the board. Her board? I asked. Harper had, in her speed, collected a board of advisors who enjoyed being called board in emails. They're not strictly a board, he said. They're investors with opinions. Just over a quarter stake. They like returns. They don't like liabilities. If they saw what I saw, they'd schedule a meeting called immediate remediation. That meeting would end with her no longer sitting in the big chair. I exhaled, and it sounded like steam. How confident are you? I don't speculate, he said. I archive. What do we do? I asked. We don't do anything, he said. You do. You take this. He held up a drive and then pulled his hand back, as if I might burn it, after I send it through a legal filter. I'm not getting you cute, I'm getting you clean. Then you deliver it, in person, to the right hands. You don't tweet. You don't gloat. I'm not a gloater, I said. You'll be, he said, and almost smiled. But wait. 2 days later, I found myself in a glass-walled room that smelled like lemon oil and certainty. 3 investors sat at the end of a table shaped like a promise. They were the same men from the dinner, only now they weren't performing. They were reading. They were asking questions that had verbs like misrepresent and commingle. I had called one of them, the one with the oat milk obsession, and said I had something he needed to see. He had told me to come. He had told his assistant to make sure I knew how to find the right elevator. I want to be very clear, I said after they'd paged through 40 printed pages and a thumb drive's worth of pain. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because I'm an owner. Of myself. Of my time. Of my business. I cannot, will not, let my life be collateral for someone else's joke. One of them looked up. You are, in fact, angry, he said. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. She's been telling people her clients will protect her, I said. She believes relationships trump receipts. Does that matter to you? What matters to me, the tallest one said, are the receipts. They scheduled their own meeting. They did not include Harper on the invitation. They did not include me. I went back to the shop and pulled 17 shots in 13 minutes because a tour group had decided caffeine should be part of their architecture walking tour. Capital A Action has a way of reminding you that most of life is tiny and tangible and right in front of you. That afternoon, a woman cried at table 4 into a muffin, a toddler learned the word foam, a man asked me if we had low-acid coffee as if that were a dietary universe. By closing, my hands smelled like lemon and steel. I lay down on the mat and slept like I had paid for it. The next morning, my phone vibrated with a text I didn't expect. Not from Harper. From the assistant with the beautiful calendar. FYI, it said. Board met. Immediate action taken. There was a PDF attached with the subject line resolution. It was not my ruin. It was hers. They had removed her as CEO effective immediately, citing breaches of fiduciary duty and contract. They had reported findings to council. They had placed the company under interim management composed of the least photogenic men in the building. The postscript was bureaucratic and devastating, all access revoked. I stared at the words until they stopped writhing. Then I made a cup of coffee that tasted like a new corner. Harper called me at noon. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Finally, I answered, because I'm civilized, and because I wanted to hear the story she would tell. How could you? She said without saying hello. Careful, I said. A question is not a sentence. You sabotaged me. I didn't. You did. I read what you wrote. They're fools, she said. They don't understand how this works. They understand math, I said. And law. You're going to regret this, she said, voice cooling to a tone I used to think was competence. You think this protects you? You signed the shop to me. It's mine. I can still walk in and take the espresso machine like a repo. You could try, I said. Or you could look at the same documents and realize everyone reads things the way they want. Go fight with them. Leave me out of it. You're nothing without me, she said, softly now, which hurt more. You're a guy who makes coffee. I am a guy who makes coffee, I said. And builds a business. Introduced you to your first clients. Designed your invoices. Paid for your laptop. You can be a lot of things, Harper, but you can't be the only one who remembers. Silence. Then, we're done. I believe that was Tuesday, I said. She hung up. What followed was not fireworks. It was a slow crumble. When you've built something on borrowed parts, the breaking is less explosion than unraveling. The interim team started asking questions that weren't rhetorical. Clients started calling their lawyers. Employees started forwarding emails that were meant to be internal only, which is a phrase that exists in the same universe as what happens in Vegas. Vendors asked for their money. The last social post on the agency's account was a picture of a white couch with the caption "Where Ideas Rest." The comments turned, then turned off. I did not comment. I made coffee. A week later, I met my landlord for a renewal discussion with a file folder so organized it made me look like a person who had always done this. I had bank statements showing cash flow that made sense, a letter from a lawyer that used words like equitable ownership, and a simple pitch, "Keep me here, and I'll make this block smell like people mean it." He agreed. Harper's lawyer sent a flurry of messages about seizure and rights. My lawyer, yes, I have one now, I get to be that guy, sent back something Iggy said would play well in court, the legal equivalent of no. Harper filed, her agency folded. Bankrupt, the notice said. Chapter 11 sounded like a book she hadn't read. There's a narrative available in this country where men exact revenge with grand gestures. That's not me. My revenge was small and daily. It was wiping the steam wine clean. It was watching a line form before 7 and knowing every face. It was a new sign on the counter that said, in sans serif, "Freedom Blend." People asked about it. Is it lighter? It's a medium roast, I'd say. Complex, bright. Notes of caramel and citrus. It tastes like contracts you read twice. They laughed. They liked the joke. They liked the origin story we wrote on the back of the bag, which went like this: brewed for anyone who's been underestimated, Freedom Blend is our ode to the moment you realized nobody was coming to save you, and you saved yourself. The city played along. Something about the name made corporate teams order it for their off-sites. A local paper did a piece called From Bean to Better that made me sound like a motivational speaker who'd chosen to be humble. A neighborhood association offered me a lease on a second location with floors that didn't creak and windows that faced a tree. I said yes. I said yes again. On opening day for the second shop, I taped the last letter onto the window, Freedom Blend, in a typeface that looked like it belonged on a map. I stood on the sidewalk at dawn with a cup that warmed my hands and watched the sun turn the glass into a stage. Alex, who had decided to stay with me rather than try Los Angeles just yet, came out and stood next to me, hair pushed back, apron crisp. "You nervous?" he asked. "I'm caffeinated," I said. "It's a better feeling." He bumped my shoulder. "You did it." "I did something," I said, because I'd learned that grand statements invite anger to come back for a sip. "I did what was in front of me." He grinned. "You going to text her?" "No," I said. "We're close to the past." He nodded like I'd said something wise. He went back in. I stayed out another minute, watching the city. A bus hissed by. A kid on a bike yelled lyrics I didn't recognize. A jogger stopped to read our menu and took a picture to send to someone who'd ask if we had oat milk. The first week of the second shop, I slept in an actual bed. The world didn't end. I wrote checks with a steadier hand. I wrote an email to our roaster about scaling. I wrote a thank you note to Iggy with the kind of sincerity that embarrasses both the writer and the reader. He replied with a picture of his espresso and the caption, "Keep roasting receipts." The third shop happened because a landlord in the West Loop had a space he couldn't fill and a daughter who followed our Instagram obsessively. The fourth came after a CFO of a company near O'Hare decided his employees would perform better if they had a third place to complain in. I found myself eating lunch in my car at odd hours, realizing I wasn't lonely, I was full. If you're waiting for me to say I forgave Harper, I don't have that sermon prepared. Forgiveness, for me, is less a warm feeling than the absence of a need. I no longer needed her to admit anything. I no longer needed her to lose. She had lost. She had also, in losing, freed me to stop narrating my life in relation to her. In the early months, I'd wake sometimes at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, hearing her voice from that stage, "He keeps the caffeine flowing while I build an empire." I would lie there and remind myself, gently, That I had built something that made people pause and smile in the middle of a day that might level them. An empire was never my word. A network, a neighborhood, a map, that felt closer. Last week, on a Thursday, a woman came in who looked like a story. She wore a raincoat too thin for November and sunglasses too big for the room. She ordered a cappuccino without looking up. When I set it down, she slid the sunglasses to the top of her head. "Hello, Aaron," she said. Harper's hair was shorter. Her voice wasn't. We were at the bar where she had once christened her agency with a legal pad and a sugar cookie. "Hello," I said. She looked around at the photos on the wall, a few black and white shots of the city, a framed article about small businesses that didn't make me roll my eyes. She looked at the bag of Freedom Blend near the register, at the logo stenciled on the to-go cups, at the line of people waiting with an impatience that was flattery. "You did it," she said, same words as Alex's, different meaning. "Good for you." "Thanks," I said. "I'm rebuilding," she said, which was a different way to say breaking. "It's harder than it looks." "It is," I said, "because grace is cheap when you can afford it." She laughed once, a soft thing. "You're not going to say I told you so?" "No," I said. "I didn't." "Right," she said. "Well. Congratulations." She touched the cup as if she might ground out a cigarette on the foam. "Freedom Blend. That a dig?" "It's a roast," I said. "It's a story." I shrugged. "It sells." She nodded. "It's good copy." She left. She didn't take the cup. A man at the end of the bar picked it up, looked at me, and raised his eyebrows. I shook my head and made him a fresh one. Later, when the rush died and the quiet felt like mercy, I thought about revenge again, about how it had tasted in my mouth when I woke on that floor and decided to be someone else, or maybe more myself. People like to ask me now what I learned, as if pain were a course with a syllabus. Here's what I learned: do the paperwork. Read the contract. Read it twice. Don't make fun of people in public unless you mean it and you're willing to live with the echo. Make the thing in front of you, then make the next thing. Keep the floor clean. Keep the receipts. Be kind enough to yourself that you don't need anyone else's applause to fall asleep. And if someone tells you you're just the guy who makes coffee, tell them yes. With your chest. Then hand them a cup that tastes like freedom and watch them take a sip and agree. We launched a new series recently, Freedom Fridays. On those mornings, we stamp a small extra line on the cup beneath the logo. It's a signature in my ridiculous handwriting. People ask what it stands for, they think it's branding. It's not. It's a reminder, mostly to me, that I own this hand and this pen and this line and this life. Sometimes a regular will point at it and say, grinning, "Does this mean I get a discount?" "No," I say, "it means you get a story." They roll their eyes. They pay anyway. They come back. There is a pleasure in small, solvable problems, the math of milk, the patience of brew time, the tension of steam, the thumbprint on a lid. There's a pleasure in saying, "Do you want room for cream?" And meaning, "Do you want room for yourself?" And watching people answer in the ways they can. On Saturday, a father brought in his daughter, who had a backpack filled with stickers and a book filled with fears. She peered over the counter as I poured, cheeks red from the cold. "Do you own this place?" she asked, as if it were either unlikely or magical. "Yes," I said. She thought about that. "Do you own all the air in here?" "No," I said. "We just rent it with good smells." She nodded, satisfied. Her father pointed to the bag of Freedom Blend. "What's that taste like?" he asked. "A good decision," I said. He laughed. He bought a bag. He took a picture of the sign. He told me his sister in Boston had just opened a bakery and needed a coffee partner. I thought about the map. I thought about flights. I thought about how much of the world smells like someone else's ground floor. That night, I closed the register and wiped the counter and looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like a mogul. I looked like a guy who had washed his hands so often you could see the clean. I thought of Harper again, briefly, like an old song you don't turn up. I hoped she was rebuilding something worth keeping. I hoped she had a lawyer who read everything. I hoped the next time she stood on a stage she found a joke that didn't draw blood. On the shelf behind me sat 3 clean cups. I picked one up and turned it, slow. Freedom Blend. The words still made me smile, not because of what they did to her, but because of what they did to me. They took a season where I had slept on a floor and turned it into a horizon. In the morning, the city would do what it always does, wake up, make a list, try. People would put on suits, or sweats, or a brave face. They would come in here and ask me for what they needed. I would give it to them. Coffee can't cure everything. But it can name the day. And some days, a name is the first step to a new life. Tomorrow, I wrote on the prep list, double batch of Freedom Blend. And then, because it was my shop and my pen and my joke and my story, I added a note just to make myself laugh, make it an empire. Then I crossed out empire with a thick black line and wrote, neatly above it, home. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.